You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, this is Alex G. I hope that you're able to tell from my episodes that I'm really excited about this podcast. One of the things that's really fun is the interactive nature of it, how listeners respond, your questions, your tweets, your suggestions. I love it. For example, last time I talked about the fact that most of our listeners are from Madison, and then the number 2 market, Chicago, and third was LA, but running neck and neck at number 4 were Seattle, Minneapolis, and New York City. And I put a little challenge out to those communities because I love each of them and I have friends there. I need you to know Seattle lost its mind. Not only did Seattle pull away from the Twin Cities, the only Midwestern city besides Chicago in the running, and New Yorkers. Now, New York, y'all know how I love you, and New Jersey. Seattle pulled out away from you and even surpassed LA. Hey, my Southern Cal friends, what is up? You let Seattle show its love for a brother by not only pulling away from the other 2 cities that it was tied with, but ahead of you. So now it goes Madison, Chicago, and Seattle. Seattle, if you keep this up, I want to come out there and hang out with you and actually record an episode someplace, or a series of episodes someplace out in Seattle while I drink some good coffee and some other stuff. So, hey, I'm excited about that. Hey, Minneapolis, New York City, New Jersey. Hey, what's up? Y'all need to handle your business. But what you need to understand is the Emerald City really showed its stuff. And hey, LA, man, I thought I was heading there this summer. I might have to change my plane, my flight arrangements, and head up to the Emerald City. So you listen, do with that what you want to. But Seattle, listen, you're getting a lot of love this week. Hey, keep that up. Second thing I want to share with you is because of a response on my Facebook page, my Dr. Alex G page, I'm going to be binge watching Dear White People. I've gotten through the first episode. I got my thoughts about Samantha and Gabe. And it's not because Gabe is white, it's because he's fragile. But I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later. But I just need you to know I'm going to be doing sort of a synopsis of each episode. So I'm in the process of binge watching. So if you want to join me, binge watch. If you watch it again. But just know I'm going to be giving my commentary on the show because I think it has excellent insight, and I'm really excited about that. The third thing that I want to bring to your attention is I was able to trace my ancestry back by just getting involved with Ancestry.com. I was able to find the slave owner who both owned and raped my great-great-great-grandmother, Venus. The product or the result of that was my great-great-grandfather, Henderson G., who's my grandfather's grandfather. I actually, in tracing it, I met the white descendants of Reuben G. and actually took a trip last year to New Orleans to meet a few of the family members. It was really an exciting trip. A little nervous about it, but it reshaped my thinking, gave me incredible about myself, about American history, gave me incredible sight into the American story that I think needs to be told. So listen, in a couple of months, I'm going to be releasing a Black Like Me series on these episodes of my trip, my insight. I'm talking with my cousin John, who I'm becoming friends with, good friends with. But we're going to dedicate a series of episodes so that it'll come out sort of a binge listening style, along the lines of what you might capture on Netflix or some of your favorite shows. You're not going to want to miss this. I'm excited about it. It's going to be something that I'll love, that you will love, but it's a unique way of telling a bit of the American story through the eyes of someone who is a result of the American story. We all are, but it's important to understand the different aspects of it. So listen, you're going to want to go ahead and subscribe right now. You might be enjoying this episode because someone sent you a link, but you really need to subscribe. That means when we drop this bundled deal, when we give you the opportunity to binge listen, if you subscribe, it will automatically be downloaded to you. And you can do that in iTunes or in Spotify by just looking for Black Like Me. Otherwise, just continue to follow me on Twitter at Alex G Jr., AlexGeejr, or on Facebook at Dr. Alex G. And I'll be posting updates from there as well. Again, this is something you don't want to miss because it's a unique twist on U.S. history, and I think that'll give you a lot to chew on. I'm going to be actually talking about genealogy with today's guest, Lisa Sharon Harper, in just a few minutes. So let's get on with today's podcast. Hey, everyone. I want to welcome you to another edition of the Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G podcast. And I am excited. I know I say that each podcast because I just keep having these great guests on and these great topics and these great conversations that are so illuminating. Today, I'm really, really excited. Before I get into introducing my guests, I want to just say thank you to our podcast family. You continue to listen. You continue to share our podcast. We have just hit the 5,000 unique download mark, and that's fantastic because we've only been out since April. And so 5,000 downloads have taken place. We're in 15 countries. We're moving further and further out. We got folks listening in Australia, folks listening in Japan, in South Africa, in South America. And so just know that means a lot to me. If you have thoughts about shows or comments on content, you can tweet out at me or to me at Alex G Jr. You can always go to my Dr. Alex G Facebook fan page, and you can write comments or ask questions because we'd love to get your feedback and your thought about our guest and also about upcoming shows. Well, today's special guest is a friend that I've known for a number of years. She's a real respected colleague and leader. Her name is Lisa Sharon Harper. She's becoming a household name. I love her heart, her boldness, her leadership, and how she's really speaking out to help America, the church, really become all that it can be. She is the founder of Freedom Road. It's an organization that she's founded. It's a consulting group that identifies communities' core issues and strengthens its capacity to build a just world together. And Lord knows we need that today. Her team works with faith communities, nonprofits, academic institutions, and the business sector. At the intersection of faith, race, gender, economic development, and environmental justice, they custom design strategic forums and trainings and transformational experiences that build a community's capacity for collective engagement toward a more just world. And I just think that this is just, it's beautiful. And she does a number of other things. She's a writer. I can't even keep up with all the books that this woman's writing. She's contributing to them. She and I last interacted down with Brian Stevenson and his team when he was talking about the opening of this new memorial, this new museum that opened up in Alabama. We were together maybe 2 years ago. We don't see each other enough. We also bump into each other because we're part of an organization where we interact and as faith leaders. And I'm just really, really glad to have her on my show. So Lisa Harper, thank you so much for being on Black Like Me today. I appreciate your being on my podcast.
Thank you so much, Alex. It is literally like a joy. I'm literally bursting from my skin right now. I'm very honored and happy to be in conversation with you, brother, and especially in this forum. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Now, Lisa, one of the things I do before I get into more of the serious matter of the great work that our guests that they're involved in, I do something that's called the Black Ice Breaker. And so I just have questions that I love to ask my guests. No. And there's no pass or fail. Listen, I know you. I know, but I just love to. So there's no wrong answers. It's really just a chance, just to have some fun, but things that are just germane to us as African American people. Okay, I'll just start. I'll just go right from the jugular. Growing up, has anyone ever asked could they touch your hair?
Oh, oh my God. Yeah. Hello. Okay, so let me just tell you. So I moved from Philadelphia to Cape May, New Jersey when I was in junior high, or actually 4th, 7th grade. Mm-hmm. And I was from an all-black city to an almost all-white area. Not all-black, but majority black. Sure. Philadelphia to majority white. Sure. Our family was the only black family in a 5-mile radius, let's put it that way. And so I had my first encounter with the hair thing there. So yes.
Oh my God. Now, people have asked. Have you had people touch your hair without asking?
Yes, I have. Yes, most of the time, they don't ask; they just touch.
Okay. No, I got you. You're absolutely right. Hey, growing up, Prince or Michael Jackson?
Michael Jackson. I mean, Prince, yes, but Michael. I'll never, ever, ever forget the first time I saw a billboard for what's his breakout one, the one that he did before Thriller, before Bad.
Off the Wall.
Yes, Off the Wall. So I'll never forget the first billboard I saw in Philly for Off the Wall, and then I listened to it, and I was like, little Michael Jackson is grown up. And,
Oh, my
he was
goodness.
older than me. So.
Right. But you still thought it was little Michael Jackson.
Yeah. And of course, everybody had a crush on him. So, we had a lot of time with Michael to actually develop relationship. And Prince came along a little bit later, at least to the mainstream. So
Sure.
I love Prince, believe me. And my sister really, really loves Prince. Met him once. But I adore Michael.
Yes. I think we come from that generation where that's how we think. Hey, have you ever yelled at like as a kid? Were you allowed to yell at your mother or roll your eyes at her or tell her that you hate her?
Oh my God. No. Oh my God. No. I mean, it's funny. Like now.
Even now.
Now I will not yell, but when we get into it and it gets overheated, sometimes we can raise our voices. But even then, my mom is like, "Who are you? Like, what is this?" Because no, we did not grow up with that. And
that wasn't allowed.
It was called Mr. and Mrs. or Ma'am. There was no first names for adults. All of that, respect.
You know what? I try to convey that. Like I'm working in at our church, we have non-Black residents and interns who work with us, and they walk into an environment where we don't call the church mothers by their first name. So it's Mother Lola, or it's Miss Jones, and but it's so interesting as people are coming in to our environment because they're used to calling people twice their age by their first name. But as you're saying, you and I, it was always Mr. Bill, Miss Sadie, or Mother so and so. But we wouldn't even think about calling adults by their first names.
God, I mean, to this day, I call my high school teachers Mr. Mathis.
I do too.
Mrs. I still can't bring myself to call them by their first name, and they're white, and they've asked me to, and I just can't do it.
I know.
I can't do it.
It's funny when when Lexi was younger, she just graduated from college 2 weeks ago. But when she was younger, I would introduce her to colleagues, particularly white colleagues, and I would say, hey, Lexi, I want you to meet my friend. This is Mr. Holiday. And he might say, hi, Lexi, I'm Jeremy. And I said, no, Lexi, that's Mr. Holiday. First of all, you're not going to undermine my fathering in front of my child. And she's not going to be calling you by your first name because your cheering ain't going to be calling me Alex. And so if you let my daughter do it, you might tell your 5-year-old son to call me Alex. And we're not about to have that.
No. Actually, it's funny. Remember, I don't know if you remember this with Mr. Stevenson, but one of the things he talked about when we were with him 2 years ago, you were right. Down at EJI, was he said that a lot of people, because they feel like they know him because they read his book, that when they first meet him, they'll call him Brian. And he has to correct them and let them know, no, it is Mr. Stevenson. I don't know you.
That's, it's so funny. Exactly, because I never thought of calling him Brian when I met him. I called him Mr. Stevenson. So to me, it's almost unfathomable that people would walk up to a stranger and say that. Lisa, it's interesting. My mother lives near me, but she has Alzheimer's dementia. And so she's living in a memory facility. And all things considered, she's having a real good experience there. Physically, she's strong. I have her on video. I dared her to run. So I got her jogging. She has a bike in my house that she can ride. This woman is going to be 80 next year, and she can jog. But we were going for a ride. And she said something to me because she has this dry humor. So she says something to me. And I was just thinking about a response. She was looking out the window. She looked back at me and said, "What did you say?" And I started laughing because I did a sermon a couple of weeks ago. And I said, my mom could listen to the cadence of my walking to tell if I was stumping or not. She'd be like, "Wait a minute, boy, come back here, come back. Who do you think you stand? Did you slam that door?" So even with dementia, my mom just cut a look at me. She said, "What did you say?" And I didn't even say anything. I just started. My mom looked at me and said, "What did you say?" I said, "Nothing, ma'am." No, ma'am. I'm just thinking. Oh my good. You know what? There's a whole lot that she has forgotten, but she has not forgotten that she's my mama. As she would say, I'm the mama. Oh my goodness. Let me see if I got something else in here fun, because you've been answering some fun questions. Let me see if I got anything else for you on here, Lisa. Let me see. Okay, this is kind of interesting. Let me see. Now, you might have evolved past this, so this might not be your hang up anymore, maybe just mine. But have you ever experienced going to a conference and being cognizant of whether or not too many black folks were sitting together, if it's a predominantly white, what maybe it was like staff conference years ago, for the organization you work with. I'm just curious, have you ever just given thought to who you're sitting with, particularly if it's people of color or Black folks, when you're at a very diverse setting, because it might seem like you're alienating yourself or singling yourselves out. Have you ever thought about that or gone through that mental exercise when sitting down with friends or colleagues at a gathering?
Yeah, well, I think about a few conferences I've been at this year. I just have to make sure I'm clear on the context. Are you saying in a really diverse group or in a really white group?
In a really white group. In a really white group.
Okay, so in a really white group, I'll be the first person to look for the Black folk. I'll be like,
oh, of course. Hello.
Yeah, and Beverly Tatum's book, why are all the Black kids sitting at the
lunchroom table? Right,
yeah.
Right.
It makes sense, right? Like that, it's real. It's about safety. And quite honestly, and this might be getting a little bit into the work that I've been doing recently, but just recently I came back from a pilgrimage that I took students from Greenville University on. And it wasn't just, actually, ironically, there were no actual students from Greenville University on the pilgrimage, but it's done through Greenville. Mm-hmm. But we had 22 people on the pilgrimage, a bunch of folks, pastors, advocates, grad students from all over the country who went on this pilgrimage to journey through the story of the control and confinement of African bodies on U.S. soil and the parallel development of the political construct of whiteness. Okay, so somebody say deep.
Yes, very, very.
It was deep, right? So basically, after that pilgrimage where we are soaking in heinous stuff that's happened. We went from Montgomery, Alabama, which was one of the largest slave ports for the slave trade from the Upper South to the Deep South. Actually, it was the largest one for a while because they were the first ones to have trains. We did that. We did the Legacy Museum, the monument, and then we also went to Mississippi, to Money, Mississippi, and
I love that name.
And where Emmett Till was snatched from his Uncle Mo's rights. His Uncle Reverend Mo's Wright's house. And then we went to Memphis and talked to the sanitation workers, and then we went to Ferguson and talked to the activists there, and poured libations on the ground where Michael Brown died. And after that experience, I went into the airport to go home, after our debrief, and I felt unsafe. I was hyper aware. Now, I don't mean, hypersensitive as in unreasonably sensitive.
Right. I know what you mean.
I had a hyper awareness of the reality that the power of whiteness absolutely gives people deemed white by the state in the United States, people of European descent who are deemed white, the power to kill with impunity. And again and again and again and again and again and again and again, it's happened. And so I realized, my God, every white person here is really a loaded gun. They don't realize it, but they are loaded guns to Black folk. So it makes sense that, and not just Black, but any people of color, just look at what's happening at the border right now. It doesn't mean that people of European descent are going to use that power.
Right.
For ill. But it does mean that according to the state and the law and the use of the law, the way the law has worked, even if it's illegal, the way that the system works is that they can tend to kill without punishment. And so it really, that whole thing about sitting together at a conference, obviously ain't nobody thinking they're going to get killed at a Christian conference. Right.
Well,
but it's
maybe.
Microaggressions. Right, it is about the microaggressions that will come your way. Somebody trying to touch your hair.
Right. Definitely. Or coming over and saying, so why are all of you sitting together? Can I sit here? Is it a party?
Yeah.
But no, you bring in some powerful things, Lisa. Oh my goodness. Listen, I want to ask you a little bit about your organization, and then I want to talk to you about some things that I don't normally hear you have a chance to talk about, your passion for genealogy or theater. So I want to talk about some of the things that Lisa Harper doesn't normally get to talk about on podcasts, but I would be remiss if I didn't let you take a moment to tell us about your organization, why you started it, how old it is. So can you just take a moment and just selfishly plug yourself and what you're doing. We're going to link it in our notes anyway, because we've got all these thousands of people that are listening and downloading, and I want to push your great work. But just tell me just a little bit about your work and why you started it, and how you feel about the work. And then I just have a bunch of general things I want to talk with you about.
Absolutely. Well, so on November, I believe it was November 6th of 2016, the election night, I was at the home of my former boss, Jim Wallace. He had a big election party, and we were all there to celebrate a new era where we believed a woman would be president for the first time in American history, and
we all
so
did.
Wonderful, blah blah blah. And where a white nationalist would be defeated, like yay! But then towards the close of the night, we began to be very cognizant that things were not going so well.
Right.
So people started to filter out, and I was the last person to leave because I just couldn't believe it. Like after midnight, and I got home and I was staying up. I stayed up all night watching. And then at about 3, I remember if you recall, about 3:30 in the morning, it started to come down that Hillary had conceded the race, right?
Right.
And then Trump stepped to the podium, and when he did, literally my body began to shake. Like, and I've never ever had this happen. I don't suffer from the shakes. Like,
sure,
but my body literally started to shake. I couldn't control it, and then I started to be cognizant. I was thinking, what is happening to me? And these words formed in my head. I feel like permission to thrive is being ripped from my body right now. That is exactly how I felt. And all I could think was, how could this happen? Now, the next day at Sojourners, we called a staff meeting, an impromptu staff meeting where we could just share. And around the table, I kid you not, people mourned. I mean, women literally wailed, including me, because it was only a few weeks before that we heard that, maybe even like the week before, that the E Entertainment piece came out, and we heard that this person who is now president had bragged that he grabbed women's. Can I say it?
Yeah, listen. This is podcast. This is Black Like Me, so you can say whatever you want to say.
Pussies.
Yes.
That he bragged about grabbing women's pussies, and it was evangelicals who put him in that seat, the highest authority in the land.
Yes.
And so we all felt betrayed. I think betrayed is really the best way to put it, and betrayed by the church. And I know that there are people of color around the country, particularly evangelicals of color, who absolutely understand what I'm talking about.
Of course.
But what happened for me was I began to ask the question, how could this happen? How? And what I began to realize is that there is a very real and deep narrative gap in our nation. We tell different stories about who we are and how we got here. And because we are telling these different stories, we have a different understanding of who we are and what it will take to become great, even what greatness will look like.
Right.
So this narrative gap is a gap in our history. It's a gap in our theology. It's a deep gap that exists between the truth and what we believe. And so
is that what you refer to as the lie, Lisa? In some of your writings and interviews, you talk about the lie.
Yes, that's right. It's the core lie. That's I usually talk about in the context of spiritual lies that we believe, or theological lies that we believe. And one of those core lies that we really have eaten for lunch and as a nation said, ooh, that tastes good, is that there are only some people who were called by God divinely to rule in this land. And there are others who were created to follow. And we have divided up those groups by the political construct of race. And so, yes, on a theological level, I call it a lie.
Sure.
On a historical level, on a sociological, as in an everyday life level, I talk about it as a narrative gap, a gap in the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and the gap that presents in our vision for the future. So, Freedom Road. About a year later, I started to feel. Actually, yeah, it was about a year later. I started to realize I am called no, actually, didn't even take that long. Literally, it took about a month later. I realized I'm called to help to shrink the narrative gap. And I needed to do it in a way that Sojourners just wasn't set up to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I transitioned from Sojourners with their blessing and formed this new consulting group called Freedom Road, LLC. And so Freedom Road exists to help people to do justice justly. And the way our main strategy for doing that is by helping us to shrink the gap in the narratives we tell each other. Because narrative shapes the world. Narrative shapes worldview, and as a result, it shapes the world we live in. It also shapes our strategies. It shapes the way we do things. And so for us, we do that through consulting, through coaching, through training, through the development of pilgrimages. In fact, literally, there's probably about 10 different groups right now that are in conversation with us about doing different pilgrimages with them around the country and the world, actually, in South Africa in particular. And we're set up to be able to, or we're working towards being able to do the same thing in Australia as well, with regard to the Aboriginal people there. But we also create forums for people to come together and come to common understanding that leads to common commitments and common action.
Sure.
So that's what we do.
You know what? I'd love it. And I just want to take a moment because we have, again, these thousands of listeners, and you're part of organizations. You work for municipalities, major corporations, denominations, and you're stuck and you want to know, what can we do to make a difference? When you look at our podcast notes, we're going to have a link here for Lisa's for her organization. Click on that. Go to that website. There are resources out here. It's not like years ago where you didn't know where to go. You didn't know how to get resources or get support for what you're doing. So those of you who are listening, you want to be part of change. You know that you're a part of an organization that's stuck. Get unstuck. Click on that link and find out about Lisa's organization and find out what they can do to help and support you. You know, Lisa, I'm so proud of you because I knew you as a young emerging leader, and so I'm not surprised by what you're doing. I'm surprised by your willingness to do it because I remember, you know, and we won't have to go into details, but I just remember just a very strategic conversation we had about your reluctance to lead, and it was and I just felt it really burned in my heart just to encourage you that that there's something bigger for you. God has something much larger for you than what you had envisioned. And I remember you saying yes to what you did not want to do. And when I look at how you've been entrusted with so much, I just have to let you know, I'm not proud just of the accomplishments and the interviews and the books and the writings. Really, that's par for the course, Lisa. That didn't surprise us. We knew you had that in you, but I don't think people understand how much you wrestled with what was the unknown. And as I see you and hear your name, and people are saying, there's this woman who's on television. I saw her in this debate or this discussion after Ferguson. She was on the split screen. She was really sharp. I smile because I know that you've always had the brilliance, but you haven't always had the willingness to just abandon yourself to your own desires, to really answer a larger call when you and I had no idea what it was. So I want to let you know I'm so proud of you for saying yes all those years ago, Lisa.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, Pastor G, you were a pastor to me before I knew that you were a pastor. And and it's really true. I think that for me, the question of willingness, I'm not sure it was willingness as much as it was belief. Belief that I was worthy of a call to lead in racial reconciliation, as we called it then, and now I would actually call it the ministry of shalom or the ministry of justice. Right?
Sure.
So I didn't think I was worthy. Who am I? I mean, literally, that's what was going through my head in our conversation years ago. Who am I? And you were the one who actually literally spoke to me and said, remember all that God has done. Remember the path that God's laid for you and the fact that God has given you all that you need to move to take the next step. And I'll tell you what, that is a real lesson to learn. God never calls us to things that are beyond us. Or let's put it this way, God never calls us to things that are beyond us when we have God with us.
Exactly. Exactly.
God makes the difference. Let's put it that way.
No, definitely. Just one more question in this area before I just start asking you some more general things. How do you take care of yourself? Because first of all, just being a believer in justice, or someone who's striving for justice, and I just have to say this honestly. Historically, when we think of our civil rights leaders, the African American men come to mind. Historically, we can name Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman. We can talk of others, but in a heavily male dominated sphere, even in the Black community, you are just clearly emerging on your own intelligence, on your own brilliance, on your own sense of call and commitment. And it's not with the hidden agenda that I'm going to, break into this, this male dominated sphere, but by just being true to your work and to the call, you really have emerged as a civil rights leader, social justice leader who happens to be female and African American. How do you take care of yourself? Because you're a trailblazer on so many levels, Lisa.
Wow. Well, when you remind me, it makes me feel like, well, maybe I need to do better.
Well, how will you take care of yourself?
So I think that honestly, I was talking to somebody else about this recently, that I think that a lot of the ways that I am able to continue to walk forward is really because of the foundations that God laid in those early ministry years.
Sure.
So the foundations of things as simple as Sabbath, things as simple as journaling, as simple as having a prayer partner, as simple as Bible study. I mean, as simple as learning to get on my knees and pray. Like these basics of discipleship are actually the bread and butter of international ministry. I mean, the only way to do it, the only way to withstand the pressure is to be strong in those basics. And the thing is that, I could do better in Sabbath. I could do better in Bible study. I could do better. We could all do better in all these things. But it's not really about doing better. And I think that's honestly one of the lies that we believe, especially in the evangelical church, that the goal is to be perfect. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to have loving relationship with God. And so what I find is that, so when I was standing in Charlottesville, right, when I was standing there facing the militia guys with the 80 other faith leaders who were on that line,
right,
and facing down the militia with their AK-47s or AR-15s or whatever they were, that was high pressure. Like that was what you call the crucible. That really was. And I think that I was thinking about, how would I have been able to do that when I was in college or when I was even a young staff worker within a varsity? Not that young staff workers within a varsity can't do this. It's not what I'm saying, but rather I was not in a place where I could do it. And I think that it was the time where God literally molded the clay, let the clay sit on the shelf for a long time, like not being used, painted the clay, glazed the clay, put it back on the shelf for a while to dry so that it wouldn't burst in the kiln, put that clay in the kiln so that it can actually be fired, and in all of the pain of that kiln, that actually allowed this pot to be a pot that can be used.
Well,
and so hello somebody. So I do actually. I'm so grateful for those. I'm grateful for those foundational years that created a pot that could withstand the pressure of Charlottesville.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. One of the things that I'm learning through our justice work here in Madison is that we've created a U.S. Black History course for our non-Black allies. It's predominantly white, but over the past 3 years, we've taken 650 white allies through this 9-week course. And what I've found is by understanding the role of faith and the Black church, and Madison's considered if you can use the term post-Christian or overly intellectualized community, but I've had conversations, meaningful conversations from folks who have said by listening to the plight of African Americans and the history of this country, it's made me as a white person, as a person who's nominally spiritual, a person who's an atheist, to really go on a search for my faith. So I love the fact that people know you as an author. They know you as a figure that's a consultant, a go-to person when racial issues arise in our country. But I think there's an opportunity for those of us who are African American and faith leaders, but also social justice leaders, the marriage of our faith and our action, our quest for justice and our quest for faith. I think we're modeling something for many people, the people for whom faith is obsolete. I think by just explaining the importance of being rooted in our faith, getting on our knees to pray, asking for direction, asking for forgiveness, and the great work we're doing is making people really rethink our faith. And so that's another element of your work, Lisa, that I'm very proud of. And thank you for even sharing that part about how you Sabbath. Thank you for sharing that, because I think people realize that this is not just rooted in your strength as an individual, as a woman who's Black. All of that has strength in it, but it also comes from a place of proximity with God. And I just think you just laid that together so beautifully.
Well, I appreciate that. And let me just say this,
sure.
Just to close a particular piece of the conversation, is that just to bring it back to love, because I think that's what I've really begun to understand, and even in the writing of the Very Good Gospel, is that at the heart of the message of the gospel is love.
Right.
God's love us, and also our capacity and call to love one another. Jesus repeats this again and again.
Right.
And I don't know how it happens that somewhere in the 1600s and 1700s, it all got translated into being perfect.
The
right?
narrative changed. The narrative changed.
Or purity, right? So being pure. That is just not, it's really literally not, it's not the gospel. It's not the point. The point is to be connected and reconnected, radically reconnected to each other with radical love, with emphatic, incredible love, because that is how we were created to live together. So I think that ultimately, I guess that relationship with God, that spirituality, it's not even just about practices. It's about practices that help me to remember and to experience the love of God, like truly, to connect with God.
Yes.
So walking on the street in Charlottesville, it literally was it was an act of faith in God. It was an act of love for God and love of neighbors. That's what that was about.
It was beautifully on display.
Every day. It's every day.
Lisa, I love it. My team, we've been just looking at your work so we could think about some of the angles we wanted to approach in having this conversation with you. So we've been trolling you a bit. But when you were on the Jen Hatmaker show, you happened to mention about some of your genealogical work. And that really struck me because one of the things I do with our U.S. Black History course is I do about a 10, 15-minute monologue about, it's a way to, we use University of Wisconsin faculty, but I give a little introduction to thank our would-be allies for coming to learn more about our U.S. history, but really focusing on what's happening in the Black history part of it. But I wanted the context to be U.S. history and not like Black history was separate. It's all a part of American history.
Right.
But as I was talking about things, I shared a story. I said, you all, I don't want you to think that this is ancient history. For example, I recently found on Ancestry.com, I knew my great-great-grandfather's name. It's Henderson. But one day I was searching his name in Ancestry.com, and I found a 70-year-old white guy who wrote and said, I just found out that my great-great-grandfather had a Black son named Henderson. Does anyone know anything about Henderson G? Well, Henderson's my grandfather's grandfather, so we connected up. I went to New Orleans to meet him. He's coming to Madison soon because we're working on a documentary. But this man is a G. He has G blood in him. His great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather were half-brothers because my name, G, is Welsh. And when the Welsh G's came to the U.S., they were given the Homestead Act. Reuben G owned and raped Venus. That child that was born a slave, was Henderson G. And knowing this history, and my mom didn't know Henderson, but she knew Henderson's son, Oscar, who was my father's grandfather, and it just connects me with this history. Yeah. So I gave this introduction, but it's changed my life because I realized I went to his home and I sat with this gentleman who's white. We have the same blood in our veins. And as he was talking, he mentioned that his grandmother, who was a G, married someone named Wilder. And I said, wait a minute, his great-grandfather, R.L. G, married a Wilder. And I said, wait, my great-grandfather, Oscar G, married Lila Wilder. So we found out, Lisa, that we were double cousins. We're from Leake County, Mississippi. We're sitting there with Wilder and G blood running in us. we can trace ourselves back to Reuben G, but this man had nothing to do with that history or that reality. But here we are sitting across the table from each other. And for the first time in my life, I'm sitting with someone who's white, who's related to me, and I don't feel like I've got to be this super black person to be at the table. At that moment, I became acutely aware of God's grace, my mother's commitment in raising me, and my own resolve to be excellent, that I no longer had to prove myself to white America if I did not have to prove myself to white G's. And it started this healing in me. So when I saw this connection about your interest in your interest in your genealogical work, I couldn't bypass the opportunity to just ask you about it. And how does, tell me a little bit about what you're finding out about your family, and how does that shape your work in justice? Because my journey is having an incredible impact on the way I think and feel about race relations and racial justice. So I'm just curious about how it plays out in your life.
Okay. So, wow, where to begin? Because this is actually huge for me. I've been tracing my family story since 1991. Let's put it that way, right? So I don't even know how many years, but it's 27 years or so.
Sure.
So I've been tracing my family history for that long. I've been on Ancestry.com for more than a decade. And my mom was the genealogist before I was, right? So that was actually one of the prime ways we would connect.
Okay.
But just, this pilgrimage, we were talking about pilgrimage. The very first pilgrimage I ever went on was one with InterVarsity, and I went on, it was called the Pilgrimage for Reconciliation.
Oh, I remember those.
Right. And so it was a month long. I tell you what, I don't know how we did that.
It was a month?
A month, 4
That's
weeks.
Right. That's
yes,
right. That's
4
right.
weeks long. 4 weeks. And that is not including the orientation and debrief. Hello, somebody, right? So we were in a bus. We traveled over 10 states on the first pilgrimage.
Wow.
Over those 4 weeks. We retraced the Cherokee Trail of Tears and the African experience in America. And the thing that struck me most about that pilgrimage was, well, besides the fact that my whole understanding of the gospel got completely upended, which you can read about in the Very Good Gospel.
Yes.
But the second thing that really blew my mind was the reality that my story, my family's story, is American history.
That's exactly what I've said.
If we learned American history through our family's stories, we would have a much better understanding of our history. Because what we have gotten is we've gotten a politicized narrative that was shaped, a meta-narrative, shaped in order to sell us on a vision of who we are as Americans. But it usually leaves out whole huge swaths of what actually happened.
Right.
And as a result, we really don't know actually how we got to be where we are. And what I found was here, my family walked the Trail of Tears according to our oral history, and as Black folk and as Native folk, as Cherokees, Chickasaws, Choctaw, and Creek.
My family is Chickasaws, Choctaw as well.
No, so actually, Choctaws and Chickasaws are cousins. Actually, along with the Cherokees, I was not Choctaw. My family was not. It was actually Cherokee, Chickasaw.
Oh, Chickasaw. Got you. No, I got you.
Right.
I got you.
So we walked that trail and we were enslaved. And what I found was going and standing on the land.
Yes.
It was a reconciliation both with the people and the story.
Yes.
And so I began to own who I am more. I was no longer trying to figure out who am I in this world. Who am I in this world was no longer answered by what I do. It was answered by where am I from?
Yes.
Who are my people? And that's the thing about both black and white, those two racial categorizations in America, is that neither of them are connected to land or people.
Exactly.
They are only political constructs developed to answer one question, the question of who is called by God to exercise dominion on this land. That is it.
That's it.
And who is not. And so on the very first census, there was only one racial category, and it was white. And then the other one was slave and other. Hello.
Yes.
We weren't even on there.
Right, right.
It took till 1800 to actually get the category black on the census.
Yes.
White and then black, slave, or other. Right. So So, and then now you have a census where you have 50 different races about that you can, and then you can write in your own. One of the races on the census is Hmong. Hello, that is not a race.
Right.
That is a culture. It is an ethnic group. It is a nationality, but it is not a racial group.
Right.
We've confused ethnicity with race and culture and nationality in the U.S., and it has caused confusion in the narrative. And so what I now advocate, and what I stood in front of my class this last pilgrimage we just did, through the story of the control and confinement of African bodies in the U.S., is I challenged everyone there to do two things. To one, build their family tree. Begin to work on your own ancestry. And two, if you can only go back as far as your mom and dad, because that is often the case, not only with people, with black folk, but also with white folk.
Yes.
And they usually are not, they may not even know their grandparents' names.
Right.
Now, you know the names of your grandparents or your great-grandparents, then you don't know how you got here. You don't know the story that led you to this place. You don't know how you've been shaped by the assumptions and the experiences of those who came before you. You don't know.
Right.
And so as a result, you interact with the world as if you are your own lone single unit that gains your understanding, or rather gains your importance in the world through power, through how much power you have, which is exactly what we did when we created the category of white and the category of black. Is we said this people group exists to hold power. And so if you are one who is deemed white by the state in the U.S., then you are one who has been trained since birth to see your value, to see who you are based on what you can do and how successful you can be, not based on your roots, not based on your family story. So that's literally part of the cancer of our nation, is that we are a nation full of uprooted people, people with no roots, people with no center, with no core, because we've allowed ourselves to be gutted by this category of race. I think one of the biggest ways that we can actually begin to fight that is to do what we can do now. We have DNA. If you don't know,
find out.
DNA. It'll tell you exactly where you're from, or at least the regions where you're from. If you don't know, go on Ancestry.com or some other ancestry
23andMe or something like that.
And do your family tree. Take responsibility, because that is not only for your own benefit, but it's for the benefit of our entire society. It is what it will take to make us healthy as a nation.
No, you're right. You know, I've discovered something, Lisa, with the U.S. Black History courses that we offer. You know, again, I mentioned they're 9 weeks. By about the third week, a phenomenon takes place. We've done this for 3 years, and in the third cohort, I saw it again. People thought that they were going to learn about my history, but when they learned that they no longer identify as Irish or Italian or German, but somewhere their families chose to be white, to check that box, to show that they were not black, that they had access, they had elite status, VIP, they could be upgraded. There's a sadness that comes over them because they realize black people did not sell out their birthright for a morsel or for a bowl of stew, that they want their music, they love their food, they love their culture, they love their hair, they love their skin, they love their noses, they love their bodies. And we lost that to become America and don't honor the traditions of our grandparents and great-grandparents. And so for me, what's very transformational in the process is not that people learn new things about black people, but they have learned that they have been deprived of their own ethnic heritage in order to buy into the American dream and the American life. And they've pitied us for being what they consider tribal or animalistic or whatever you want to call it. But they realize that they're really that they've been ravaged by their own internal drive because they don't really know where they come from. And the tears that happens is not because they're just sorry for what happened to black people. They're beginning to mourn over white people, and they realize that they have raised boys and girls in this country who don't really know who they are, and they train them under the guise of you're white, you're privileged, and you're part of the American dream, and they don't even know where to begin to deconstruct it. And they're just their hearts are heavy because they have believed a lie about what it means to be American or to be white. And that's a powerful part of the history. People realize how they have been duped, that we were not the only ones hurt by this narrative, but they have been hurt by this narrative as well.
Yeah, I mean, not just hurt, but I mean, literally injured. Like,
injured.
As in, a car wreck, a train wreck, as in body mangled, disfigured, twisted, even crushed. Because what you have is you have a whole group, you have multiple groups of people who have been grouped together, aggregated under one umbrella called white. And that umbrella has gutted them.
Yes.
From
That's a good
sense
word,
of
gutted.
belonging. From a sense of belonging. There is no belonging except to this thing called whiteness, or maybe even the ideal of Americanness. And sometimes you do that. Oh, we are American. Yes. But what you're doing really, I mean, let's look at this legal. Like, let's literally look at the law. Let's look at the history of the law. When you say, when folks normally say American, they are really normally saying white American.
Right.
And they may not even be saying that, but that is what the law has taught us to see.
You're
and that's what the
right.
Civil Rights Movement was all about. Like, that's what Black Lives Matter is all about. That's what the fight for immigration reform is all about, is the question of who is American.
Right.
And what we have right now, I think in some ways, as much as my body shook when Trump hit that podium, I think in some ways it's actually done us a service, because it's made explicit the things that we held implicitly, unconsciously, or maybe only in private. In private company would people have those white people have those conversations, conversations that you normally have around white kitchen tables. Not the talk, but rather the talk about how you maintain and keep dominion through your bank account and all that stuff. So go on.
No. I was going to say, as you said this, as you were talking, I thought just a few weeks ago, we released a podcast that was talking about the Starbucks incident, but also I was making the statement that Trump is really a ventriloquist doll, that people are saying he's ruined our country. And I said, no. This man is sitting on America's lap, and he is mouthing what America has always said. And maybe since the Civil Rights Movement, America just mouthed these words but didn't really articulate them. But he is merely articulating the very heartbeat of America, about what they think about what we've allowed about women's bodies and Black people's bodies and mass incarceration. Folks are really showing true colors, and so that podcast just brought to light what you're saying. I think not only did you shake, I think heaven shook. I think hell shook a little bit too. But I just think we all shook, because people felt that we took a huge step backwards. But many of us as African Americans are saying, we've been trying to tell you that we have not made the progress we thought. We've allowed some people to make it. And certain things have been illegalized, but we had never hit the reset button, because we're not talking about the work of the heart and true transformation. Why do we think that this stuff went away with bell bottoms or just a fad of the 50s or the 60s? This stuff still exists, and the person who's occupying 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is just living proof that America is really getting a chance to say with boldness what America's been wanting to say. And you just hit that so powerfully, Lisa.
Let me just say this, that I think that there's also something very really important for people, particularly pastors and faith leaders, or anybody who's listening, to understand. And that is that on a spiritual level, on a theological level, let's think about America theologically. When we think about America theologically, we have to reckon with the reality that America as a nation was literally built on the back of genocide and free labor.
Exactly.
So the removal of whole people groups, actually literally over 500 people groups, that were thriving here. It was not a vast wilderness. That's one of those narratives that was told in order to justify the genocide.
Exactly.
And then on the backs of free labor. So you had 56 years of free labor.
No personnel costs.
No personnel costs. So of course you now are going to build an empire. Of course you're going to build one of the largest and free economies in America. It's never been free. Not even free now. Hello, somebody with the free market. It's free. It's only free for those who have the power to exploit the labor of of people made in the image of God, to exploit the image of God.
Right, right.
So we have this history. We have these things we've done. And because we've never reckoned with that,
right.
we've never fixed it. We've never had a truth. We've never actually told the whole truth. Because of that, we keep repeating it.
Yes, we
do.
So
people say, oh, that's in the past, but it's not in the past.
It's not.
We are doing near free labor right now in prison through mass incarceration.
Special education.
I think that one of the very first things that Jeff Sessions did when he got into his seat as the Attorney General, one of the first things he did was to reinstitute for-profit prisons.
Yes.
Why?
Right.
Because there is fundamental belief among some that some people were simply created to be the workhorses that give us money.
So they can sleep at night and spend their money during the day and sleep at night. They tell themselves it's part of our own American exceptionalism. God is with them.
Right. It's manifest destiny. Therefore, it's okay. God will clear us in the end. All Jesus had to do was die for it, and we're good. This is where this lands us. This is why. I mean, look, can we go there? This is why the Southern Baptist Convention is the Southern Baptist Convention.
Mm-hmm.
Why it exists is because they did a backflip and 3 somersaults with a triple twist in the 1840s and 50s
in tuck position.
In order to escape the judgment of God when the question of slavery came down, and they said, no, but predestination. Who are we to judge who God has ordained to be a slave?
Yes.
Right? And who are we to say that God does not ordain missionaries to go to Africa who own slaves, right? Who are we to say that? So they created an entire denomination for that and did not repent of it until 1995.
That's a lot of sin.
Of it. Just 5 years later, they turned around and said, women can't preach or teach. Hello.
Right.
I mean, and I don't mean to bash the Southern Baptists. That is one. That's only
it's just one example
among many in the United States that have never reckoned with the truth.
And Lisa, you and I know theologically, if you don't reckon with the truth, if you don't have true sorrow, a true lament for the wrong, there is absolutely no room for repentance or for metanoia. There's no room for that change. So theologically, if we believe that we can continue to be culpable of sin for which we don't repent, from which we never turn, we don't really believe that there can be forgiveness because it's what we preach to other people. And the fact that we have filled ourselves with such falsehood so that we could justify our own greed and maintain our own possessiveness it's a very sorry witness for our faith.
And at the heart of that sin is the belief that domination of the other is actually okay.
Yes.
That dominion means domination.
Yes.
And that is a lie. That is a spiritual lie from the pit of hell.
Yes, it is.
That at the core of the good news of the gospel is that God created us all in radical right relationship with each other. And one of those things that it looks like to have that radical right relationship is that every single human being is made in the image of God. And what that means in the text is that we are all of us, created with the call of God and the capacity, all things being equal, to exercise stewardship of the world, to make choices that impact the world, to exercise agency. And when we act, when we govern, whether it be our nations or our churches, in ways that limit the capacity of any people or people group, be they racial, ethnic, cultural, sexual orientation, or even gender. When we limit the capacity of people made in the image of God to exercise agency in the world, we are limiting the image of God on earth. And I would argue we are actually declaring war on the kingdom of God.
Well, on God. You're right, God's rule, but also against God, because these are folks made in God's likeness and image. And it's why even in Old Testament, God's folks would get in trouble because they would forget the alien, the motherless, the fatherless, the widows. They would forget those who are disenfranchised. And if we think that we're not going to experience some type of kickback or fallout from that, we're wrong. We're so wrong.
That's right. And when Jesus came, what did Jesus? I mean, in the very first words of Luke's account of the gospel. Luke actually sets up his gospel with these words: in the days of King Herod. That's in the days of a despot, in the days of governance that was that was brutal, in the days of a governor who would actually kill his own family in order to maintain power, and the days of a man who loved to build tall buildings with his name on it. Hello, somebody, or at least his name. Hello, somebody. In those days, Jesus was born. And in those days, Mary sang a song. And the song that she said there is going to be a reversal.
Yes.
And in those days, Jesus showed up in the synagogue, and he unrolled the scroll and pointed right to Isaiah 61, which says clearly, this is the good news, that I have been anointed to preach good news to the oppressed.
Yes, we forget that.
To those who have been dominated. To those who have been told you're not made to exercise dominion. You are not fully human. Whether you be black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, whether you be woman or man, or any number of the gender identifications that lie therein of, whether you be LGBTQIA or any of the other initials that could really stretch on for miles. There's about 26 of them right now, and there might even be more.
Right.
So whoever you are created in the image of God, and you are called by God as a human being to exercise dominion in the world. And that is the great lie of our nation, and quite honestly, the great lie that has been propagated within our churches, is that right, that call, that capacity has only been reserved for certain people.
Lisa, I feel like opening the doors of the church, taking up an offering and opening the doors of the church.
Well, I wouldn't mind that.
No, listen, one of my producers is sitting here with a note saying, this woman is preaching. This is so powerful. Lisa, let me do this. They're giving me the signal that I got like 3 minutes. Can I fire a couple of questions at you? But let me just do this first of all. One, I need to have you back from time to time, particularly as things happen on a national platform, because I love sitting back and giving you a chance to have access to people who've been following my work. And I just love the idea of exposing friends to our listeners to friends who are doing great work. So just a couple of things that I would love to close out with. And you have been just a joy to be with. And these are random, but I just want your thought on this. 2 people who you'd love to have dinner with, one living, one who's deceased, but you just love to spend an evening picking their brain, asking them questions. Anyone come to mind?
Wow. Okay. You said 2 people?
Yes. One is living and one's living and one's deceased. Who you loved, and they don't have to be famous. It could be a family member, but one living person who you'd love to spend an evening with across the dinner table, and you could just talk about whatever you wanted to, and one deceased.
Wow. One person who is not living, at least not on this earth. Right. That I would love to talk to is my 3rd great-grandmother, Lea Ballard.
Really?
She was the last adult slave in our family. And she was enslaved in South Carolina, Camden, South Carolina. And she had her own land in 1900, and I don't know how. But on that land, she actually raised 3 generations of people, including my own grandmother. My grandmother was raised by the last enslaved person in our family. That's how far back it goes. It's not far at all.
No, you're right. That's not ancient history.
No, not at all. So I would want to sit down and have lunch, and have dinner with her.
How about a living person? Is there a living individual you'd love to have a meal with?
So I would love, 2 living individuals came to mind. Mm-hmm. There are many, actually.
Sure.
But a living individual that I would like to have dinner with, the first person that came to mind actually was Brian Stevenson. Okay. And that might be because I have a crush.
That's all right. That's all right.
Hey, look, I'm just normal, right?
No, you are.
Also,
no, shoot.
Also, because quite honestly,
y'all could take over the world.
He's a brilliant man.
He sure is.
He is we think alike, and I want to know more of his story, his own story. I read Just Mercy, but that's more about his work, right? But I want to know more about his story and what led him to be the person he is.
Yes.
And also the vision he has for the future. I would love to pick his brain about this question of the narrative gap and ask him questions. And then the other person who you didn't give me this option, but I have to say the other competing person in my mind is Oprah, because as a Black woman, I think that she embodies somebody who has learned to see, recognize, and move on her God-given call to exercise dominion in the world. And so she, in many ways, is a distant mentor to me. I look to her, I see her life, I see her, and I try to emulate that confidence in the call to exercise dominion in the world.
I love that. I love that. Let me see. Until they cut me off, I'm just going to keep asking questions. They say, they're telling me just one more minute. Your dream for the church.
My dream for the church is that the church would be worthy of the moniker Bride of Christ.
Oh, snap. No, dang, Lisa, that was powerful. Like, I'm going to slide others in because they're telling me that we're out of time. But let me just do this real quickly. Lisa, let me see if you can just answer this in like 20 seconds. 15. I love what you talked about, how white evangelicalism was co-opted in the 80s. But there are people who say that you've woven politics into your faith work. Like 15 seconds, how would you either address or refute that you are not repeating what you said has happened in the white evangelical church with your message? Because I think it's just biblical, and people may call it political. But 15 seconds, but what would you say to people who would say, well, aren't you doing the same thing that white evangelicals did? Haven't you been co-opted? What would you say to that in 15 seconds?
Great question. I wrote a couple of articles about this, but one in particular I'll point you to on Huffington Post called "A Call to Transform Our Politics."
We're going to link that.
A call to transform our politics. And in this blog post, what I talk about is the need for us to extricate ourselves from the linear continuum of liberal to conservative, because that is a political identification. It's a political ideology that literally has nothing to do with Scripture. Scripture, there were no liberals in Scripture. There were no conservatives in Scripture. Right. There's only the story of God and people and God's work to actually reconcile the world with itself and with God. And so the call is to take ourselves out of that and to reorient ourselves around the axis of shalom, of the kingdom of God, of the rule of God, and to ask rather the question, what does the citizenship in the kingdom of God require of itself?
Lisa, that's great. That is powerful. Hey, last thing I want to just say to you is that sometime soon we're going to be dropping a bundle of podcast interviews, reflections of my trip last August to New Orleans to meet my white relatives. And as I mentioned, my cousin John is going to be, and we call each other Cousin John, Cousin Alex. He's going to be in Madison because we're actually making a documentary. A local TV personality has taken up our story, and we're going to be telling about why this is important to me, what we're learning about each other, and what it means to reconciliation. But we've involved some journalism students from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but we're dropping a bundle real soon. So I'll make you aware of that also, Lisa, because I know you'd love to see it. But they're shooing me down. Listen, my special guest and my good friend is Lisa Sharon Harper. She's a brilliant theologian and practitioner of justice and faith, and she just makes the body of faith proud, and she makes me proud. Lisa, please, please, please promise me that you'll come back to the show sometime. And thank you so much for making my day and for what you're doing to make the church and America worthy of its title and its moniker. I appreciate and respect you so much, and I'm glad that there are women like you doing what you're doing, because you're someone I want my daughter to look up to read, and to follow. So thank you so much, sister. I appreciate you. Take care of yourself, because we need you and we value you, all right?
Thank you so much, Alex. It's been an honor and a joy.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.